Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now proceed with our next session on the subject Gen AI Scalable Opportunities for Bank and FIs. I am pleased to welcome the panelists to the dais Shri Yusuf Rupawala, CTO, Bank of India, Shri Ramesh Lakshminarayan, CIO and Group Head IT HDFC Bank, Shri Ravi Pichan, CIO, RBL Bank, Shri Bhavesh Jain, CRO, TransUnion Civil, Shri Vijosh Amayat, Director and Tech Strategics BFSI, Microsoft India, Shri Pankaj Sharma, Chief Strategy and Digital Transformation Officer, Yes Bank, and moderator for this session, Shri Nipun Karla, Managing Director and Partner BCG. May I request Shri Nipun Kalra to initiate the panel discussion? Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thanks. So we'll get started with GenAI. If we have a conference on doesn't matter what topic, and we don't talk about GenAI, it's not a conference anymore. So it's important that we cover this, ever important and uh, much talked about subject. So I wanted to first just open up with this. And we've all been following the news. We've all been seeing the interesting movements of what's been happening. I can very comfortably say that it'd be super hard for any large language model to predict this kind of story or even come up with something as creative as what was happening in the news in the last few days. You've all heard about jobs getting impacted. Is there a real impact, major impact or not for generative AI? Nobody could have ever expected these to be the first few jobs that got impacted. But that's what's really played out in the last few days. What I'll try and do is I will try and set up the context of why generative AI can be so important, especially for banks. While there are many sort of different aspects that have been getting explored in the space of Gen AI, it doesn't matter what sector, but specifically for banks, one big differentiator that we have, or as financial institutions more broadly, is that we have a gold mine of data. Nobody's got the kind of data, or no industry, no sector has got the kind of data like we have. And especially as we think about transactions, we think about call logs, we think about behavior on loans, any interaction on channels, digital or otherwise, there is a lot of data that's getting generated in our financial institutions. And this powers up not just generative AI, but also, of course, predictive AI, which is, of course, now called traditional AI. Very quickly, it's become traditional. As we think about how predictive and generative AI sort of interact with each other or complement each other, one very easy way, sort of layman explanation of predictive and generative AI is what's on the page here. Just predictive AI is basically your left brain. That's where all the analytical thinking or decision making is happening. Mostly it's based on structured data. It can assign probabilities. There is classification kind of analytics that's happening. But essentially it's supporting decision making. And as you think about the right brain, which is basically generative AI, or simpler form of understanding what is generative AI, is where, let's say, more creation is happening, where text is getting created or images are getting created and so on. A very simply put sort of view of predictive and generative AI, but there's a meta point that's hidden over there. The meta point that's hidden over there is that it's very hard to have only the left brain take all decisions or only the right brain take all, let's say, the actual delivery of what's happening. You often need both of them to complement each other. And as we think about that, it's a very busy slide, but as you think about this specifically in the financial services space and you try and map the entire value chain, there are many, many left and right brain use cases that come together. And many institutions are at this point in time, of course, still catching up on the left brain use cases, and the right brain has also suddenly come up. But the idea is to see that is there a way for us to think about complementing the left and the right really quickly in some of these dimensions and start getting to value. So what we'll try and do today is that we'll try and explore a few different sort of spaces. I wanted to also just once touch upon this as a specific area. Imagine, we are talking about a car, right? And look at the first picture over there at the bottom. It basically just means that one way for us to start using generative AI is to actually start increasing productivity of whatever we are doing today. Just getting better at what we are doing. It could be 15%, 20% more. but this is hardly a differentiator. It'll become table stakes super soon. You were doing what you were doing, you're just doing it better. The second one is where you basically think about reshaping what, let's say, has been existing. It could be reshaping a function altogether. It could be something like customer service or marketing or engineering just getting reimagined in full. An existing function, but let's say getting reimagined. And the third space is actually thinking about, are there new business models or potential opportunities or value pools that we were not able to attack that we can potentially start attacking now just because we've got the wherewithal of generative AI. So we'll try and explore that. And then, of course, it's very hard to not talk about what will it take. Will it take, what kind of talent will it take inside organizations? Who will shape the agenda and how will they shape this agenda of what really should one go after? Who will be the potential users of, let's say, the assets that are created? And how does one think about governing this, right? So there are different kind of course, talent also within these financial institutions that will have some sort of impact, and all of this has to somehow upscale and adapt. So what I'll do today is, we of course have a big panel and we've got many different aspects of attacking the same problem that'll make the panel interesting, hopefully. We'll try and break it into 4 segments. We'll first talk about use cases. We'll talk about what is really making sense, what is potentially going to scale up first, and so on. The second bit is going to be around how do you really bring it to life? What kind of hard capabilities does one need, both on the tech and on the data side? And are there any risks and challenges that one is looking at? The third one is mostly around talent and what kind of changes are we already expecting or envisioning, and what are financial institutions investing in. And finally, I will request the panelists to just future gaze a little bit and talk about, let's say, what happens 3 years, 5 years out, beyond the hype. There's a lot of discussion happening on this, but where will this settle and what happens, let's say, 3 years out. So that's the flow of the panel today, the way we've envisioned this. What I'll first just request all of you is to pull out your phones for a quick poll, if you don't mind, as we get into the first one. Are you able to scan the code? Go to the polls. There is a Q&A and there is a polls. Go to polls and you'll see a question over there. So we said, which GenAI use cases do you expect are going to be scaled up first in your organizations in the short to medium term? There's collections augmentation, customer service, marketing and personalization, or augmenting credit underwriting. Very interesting. Customer service leading, marketing next, something on collections. Pankaj, I'm going to ask you to respond to what the audience is telling you.
I think before we start, so Nipul represents BCG. So 2 days ago, there was a study done by FT, and they've said that the consultants who started using Gen AI, they've been able to increase the productivity by 43%. So I think it's not impacting only the FS industry, it's also impacting the consulting industry. I thought I'll give you a perspective on how the world is moving across. So coming back to this particular aspect, so I am particularly positive about this whole credit underwriting point which is coming across, which right now hovering around 32%. So let me give you how I see it, how this whole industry has shaped in last few years. So if you see era 1, which you can say was 5-7 years ago, and if you divide this credit part into 3 parts, which is your data, your rules, and the decision-making vector. So if you see the data earlier, everything was on manual verification. Like you used to get manual inputs and the credit guy used to see it on a manual basis. The rules were expert-based rules, judgmental rules. And decisioning, again, was a traditional way of decisioning where you used to prepare the credit approval memorandums. You actually had, if you see the retail side, you had the CPAs helping you out in preparation of the CAMs and then taking a decision around it. In last 5-7 years, we've seen if you can see the left part of the brain, what Nipun showed some time ago, where the predictive AI is coming into play. So we have seen the data has become more automated. We have got API-based integrations. We've got account aggregator. A lot of fintech partners have come where the bank statements, everything, all about data has become API-led. Similarly, on the rules which were there, which were earlier expert and judgment-based rules, we have seen a dramatic change, and you got machine learning playing a key role over there. That's where the predictive AI was playing a key role. But the decisioning part was still manual, where the guys were still looking at the credit approval memorandum. However, maybe the inputs were coming in a more structured manner. So as we move to Gen AI, I think the credit, the bottommost part and the most important part, the decision making will also start moving in an automated manner. And how it will work across is that as we understand, through the various unstructured data and the structured data which is already there in the application form, we'll have the credit approval coming across as a composite output over there, and you will have a human in the loop just looking at the output and maybe taking a decision around it. I think, Nipun, that's a...
So very interesting. You picked the third one in the list of use cases that we have over here. Any comments, Ravi, on customer service? What do you imagine? What's happening in that space and/or marketing?
So I think it's a journey, and we shouldn't be looking at Gen AI in isolation. It's more a progression of the overall AI landscape, and it definitely brings a lot of power and potential to the unstructured data and the use of unstructured data. So from a use case perspective, I look at it again as a journey. There is obviously a tendency to get carried away, and I think it's important to keep head on the shoulder. So I would kind of agree with the poll that is out there. I would probably give marketing and personalization a little bit more edge, and then evolve into customer service. I think customer service is important, and how do we use this tool to provide that value that the customer expects. But still we're in early days, so there's a lot of theory. Proof of the pudding is always when you actually get it on the ground. So starting with marketing and personalization, evolving into customer service, and then getting into more of the niche areas of credit underwriting, collections, etc. And more importantly, the combination of, like you called out, the left side of the brain and right side of the brain, using the overall technology set, what you have, and not Gen AI in isolation, is going to be the key to deliver both the value back to the customer, and therefore the impact you could create in the market.
So let me ask you, for all the other panelists, most of us are experimenting with something or the other. There may be small POCs at this point in time, but there is definitely some live experiments. But as you think about prioritizing the use cases, which ones to go after first versus not? Because there is, of course, while we've picked up 4 over here, but the slide before, which had like the full value chain and so many use cases that exist, how does one go about thinking about prioritizing which ones to go after first versus not?
So, Nipun, if you don't mind, can I just have because I have a slightly different view as compared to Pankaj on the credit underwriting use case, because at TransUnion Civil, we do that for living. So there, the predictive AI works very well because the event you want to predict. One. Second is in terms of the STP journeys have been well established on the unsecured side. And the concern with generative AI on the credit underwriting stages, twofold. One is that it can bring in a lot of data biases as you train the underwriting models. Second is that on the underwriting use case, the FI as well as the CIC is obligated to explain the reason of rejection to the end consumer. In that scenario, it's very difficult to explain why an institution took a decision to reject or sort of restrict the amount. In those scenarios, regulated entities will find it very difficult to explain to the end consumer the approach used in generative AI modeling. So I feel that that's some time before that use case can be right away deployed. Probably the other point which you asked, saying that the customer service, marketing, and even on the credit underwriting, the current sort of Gen AI approach can be used on profiling, fine-tuning some of the models, sort of sanitizing some of the unstructured data points, which can go as an input into the predictive AI approach, which is established for some time now. So I see that as an upcoming trend, vis-a-vis straight away the underwriting approach being used.
Nipur, let me just add to what Bhavesh said. So there are two ways to look at it. One on the my answer was more on the wholesale side because you've not seen a lot of work happening on the wholesale side, and wholesale is where you actually have a person spends a couple of days, the relationship manager spends a couple of days, then the credit analyst spends a couple of days again, and then they prepare a 45 page document which looks at the credit policy of the bank, looks at the rules which have been put across by the risk team, and then comes across with a set of recommendations. So that's where this Gen AI can play a very important role because the information which is already there, plus the unstructured data which can come across from as wide things as the newspaper information, as other important elements which can be pulled across from the web. It helps in providing this information in a very comprehensive manner. On the retail side, how it will augment what people like you are already doing is like we have scorecards where we take the help of people like you and making scorecards. How we calibrate the scorecards, how the various, after 6 months, how we relook at the model on the basis of the early warnings which are coming across. There, again, Gen AI can play a strong role, input in giving what kind of decisions we can take. So it's important that we understand what is the right approach for the right case. So if you look at these 4 elements also which have been put across, I would add besides these 4 things, the risk and fraud analytics as one of the important element where banks are already taking help of Gen AI globally, and in India also work has started around this.
In fact, I thought I'll come in because the case that Pankaj brought in, we did a pilot on that. So writing a credit access memo. I think it's been good and bad both. So let's put it that way. That when you the biggest impediment is still getting the right data inputs for the model because frankly credit underwriting over a period of time, the number of credit memos that have been documented and then reading them through and then kind of training has been the difficult part actually. You would agree with me because there isn't a memo text sitting in a standard way actually. So that's been one of the learnings. But what came out is the ability to take public data and the financial figures and putting them into real blocks to kind of analyze. So that definitely we saw good benefits. So we saw about 50 to 60% of a CAM coming in some shape or the form. And then of course, that itself is a big gain because frankly, you're starting at absolute zero. So I think both sides are right in that sense, and that's why this whole left-right kind of a combination keeps coming in, right? So I think that's a good thing. And again, on this particular slide, I also think automation and from a IT automation perspective is a very strong use case, which probably, to my mind, comes as a very apparent use case, right? I mean, the ability to kind of, I wouldn't say code, but co-pilot and quality of checks and then vulnerability scans, stuff like that. I think lots can be done on the development side per se. So I think that's also a very strong use case out here.
Can I just go in? Yeah. So I think I generally personally trend towards the first 2 points on customer service and marketing and personalization. Because that's where the moment of truth comes, where the bank actually interacts with its end customer. That's where the whole Gen AI piece can be used very well. So an example that comes to my mind is that typical in any industry, including banking, there are brochures of products that we give to customers, to sell our products, to give them idea about the products. But if in some way we can have the customer's persona, the way he or she thinks about life, way looks at things, if those brochures are customized, using Gen AI, then the production becomes dynamic and personalized based on an individual customer's preference. And then this logic further extends down to the way the bank interacts with the customer. The language used, the tone used, the messages that they go, the feedback requests they go. So this kind of real-time creativity can be embedded based on the customer's preferences and can be very strongly personalized, which can bring a very superior customer experience.
Understood. You know, if I can ask you to just step back from the use case for a minute and think about why did you prioritize one use case over the other, and what makes you, of course, resources are limited. You know, not everybody is jumping at everything. Experiments, of course, will allow you to understand. You know, for example, 50, 60% on the cam, some sort of accuracy one is able to get. But why should I pick one use case over another?
I think it's a very pertinent question because it's a new field, right? At the end of the day, uh, everybody's trying to understand this animal. It's not like it's there to go, right? Uh, so prioritization is critical, and there are certain aspects that come into it. One, of course, what's the perceived benefit that you will get into each of the domains, whether it's credit, whether it's customer service. The second aspect, like I think also is the availability of the platform itself. I think we're still at a very nascent stage. So do you use a private instance to run your models? Do you use a public AI? Do you use them via media to build something around that? That's still a gray area, especially with India norms around localization and stuff like that. So that's the second part of the decision that comes in. The third is obviously the skill sets that you bring to the table. Because I do think that just putting a data scientist on the table and then trying to just tune the GenAI is not the only thing, because a lot of domain guys have to be available to make it happen. So I think just the availability of the right skill sets in that particular zone, and then the fourth is the risk-taking capabilities. I do see that as a very key aspect, because a lot of business units still are wary of saying, oh, no, this is something that I'm not so sure. Some say, no, we want to kind of do this, because this kind of will help us. So I think the various contributors to this, I think most of the banks today are still at pilot POC kind of stage. I think on the predictive AI, I think a lot of move has happened, and surely I think things have moved fair bit in last 2 years' time. On GenAI, as I think as the ecosystem evolves, I think we will see more prioritization, sharper prioritization, and I think it is something that's exciting, but at the same time, just be balanced about it.
So, Nipun, I think Ramesh summarizes pretty well. But besides the prioritization, I think what we, as a bank, what we're looking at is look at how we can supplement the predictive AI capabilities in our current use cases. So if I, give you a couple of examples, I think next best product, I think every bank looks at cross-sell opportunities and everything. So that's something which comes across from machine learning and looking at the data which we already have. What we are now doing is that how you can, when an RM is having a discussion with the customer, how can you prepare a script for that on the basis of the interactions which he has had with on the various channels, or in the last 6 months how the customer is behaved. So that's like supplementing the predictive AI and using GenAI. So we should look at not only prioritizing individually GenAI, but seeing that how our current processes can be supplemented with the GenAI capabilities. Similarly, on the phone banking side, I think quality checks and there's various aspects where traditionally machine learning has been used, where you go put across those 5 keywords and see how the various customer service calls have been handled. But now can we embed the phone banking agent with the next conversation when an incoming call is coming? So can we give those across those prompts? So that's again supplementing the predictive AI capabilities and using GenAI in a more complementary manner. So my view is that besides just looking at prioritization, I think as various institutions, we have to look at it how we can supplement the current predictive AI capabilities and use them better.
So let me move to the next area that I wanted to touch upon. Now, these are just some quotes, and quotes from either practitioners or people that we've interacted with as BCG and so on. But I just wanted to bring like a few elements to the discussion. So as you think about use cases and as you think about experimenting with actually the, let's say, the capabilities that are available, look at the first one. Yeah, Hugging Face has more than 380,000 open source models. And GPT-4, of course, the more popular sort of OpenAI GPT-4, ranks 20th out of 110 information retrieval models. 110 info retrieval models, GPT-4 is 20th. It is actually a very tough problem to crack, right? It's a maze to actually get through this. Look at the second one. Less than 10% companies have so far progressed from POC to scale. Especially, of course, as you think about And like you said, Ramesh, which ones, let's say, have the appetite, have the talent, have the architecture, have the data available, and are they even able to think about scaling up or not? And of course, the elements of sometimes getting not necessarily the most intelligent answers, and the element of reproducibility and explainability, like we spoke about, right? So as you think about scale up, as you think about getting meaningful, real dent on the P&L, what is stopping us from getting there? Josh, you want to talk about that? How do you make this happen?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, first of all, let me try to break this into a couple of pieces. The first one, as you say, 380,000 open source models and stuff. Now, one needs to look at Gen AI as a platform. So, think of it as an era where you started with DOS, then you came to Windows, they were platforms, and Gen AI is a platform. So, you need to take a look at this from a platform perspective, number one. And number two, and when you have a platform, you will have so many number of models there, so many models being built. There will be a lot of things which the platform will get built upon so that people, so that the end users can leverage that. Now, the second part of the point is enterprises experimenting with Gen AI. Now there is a fundamental difference in thinking. Now with Gen AI, I mean, as everybody would have done some bit of experimenting with ChatGPT and stuff, you would have seen you write a question and you get a response, which is in a story format, which points to the fact that you need to look at content development as a very serious thing that you're going to look at. And then from there, you have to work backwards and look at all your systems. A couple of those systems will be modern, newly developed ones, couple of them will be old. They will have data in whatever form or shape you have. Now, this is where that experimentation comes from. In whatever shape, and everybody else alluded to many use cases, depending upon the backend systems that you have, which is where you then have to figure out how do you get this data, clean this data, and then format this data, let's say as simple as getting all the date formats in a common format, then kind of clubbing it or tagging it together, and then kind of mapping it to some standard schemas, because everybody here is from banking. There are these industry standard models like BIAN, banking industry architecture network-based models. So you will have to somewhere map this plethora of data to a standard schema, and then you need to start thinking of features which are relevant in analysis, like what kind of transaction types are happening, what kind of volumes are being, I mean, what kind of frequency is the transaction being done. So this whole number of steps, by the time you reach in kind of training a Gen AI model and getting output is a longish journey, which is why the POC part comes in. Because people are experimenting in, like Ramesh mentioned, IT automation is an easier one. Probably some of the others are systems where it is very difficult to come. And after doing all of these things, as I started by saying that it's content, there is an experimentation, and I'll give you an illustration. Your response from the Gen AI model needs to be based on personality as well, which is why you have to be a story writer, which means an introvert personality will need a response coming out basis data, versus an extrovert personality may want a response coming out of a story kind of thing. So creating all of this at the end of it with the data which you have is a journey which has got multiple stages, and there are risks of accuracy and all of those things, which is why the experimentation is happening.
And there are, of course, everyone's on a different journey, and some are a little bit sort of further ahead, some others are just getting off the ground. But, as you think about risks that you've potentially overcome already, given that, some POCs have happened, some experiments have been successful, is there any advice for the ones that are just getting off the ground now? And how should they think about this? Any experience that can be shared?
I think I can come in here. I think one, like I said, it's the regulatory aspects, the privacy aspects have to be kept in place. I think it's extremely important. And there are multiple models to look at. And we did some work around that. Is one to say what can go into a public AI model, right? Very clearly, enterprises just going on pure public AI is just not happening. So that's definitely one clear learning. Second, there's an approach which is where you do a public AI, but you do a vector DB to kind of segregate the whole model. It's like a gateway which is sitting in the middle and kind of allowing you to kind of do your own models and then at the same time leverage the public API, public AI kind of models. Some cases you could kind of go and look at that very, very intuitively. Then there will be set of use cases where you say, no, I bring in my metal and I will bring in my, a model that's a framework. I mean, a kind of a Llama 2 kind of a model and say, let me just kind of do my entire learning on that. So you have to be very clear from a technology and architectural construct where you want to go, because each of them have different kind of connotations in that sense. Secondly, I think the GPU compute is again a matter on the table. It's not going away because it just kind of adds to the cost that you are kind of going to incur for a POC that you want to pay. And in general, I think the appetite for a POC, a paid POC in India is not high. I always say that because we are not a country which saying free mein de do, and then it doesn't work because these are very, very high-end kind of work. There's a lot of money involved out here. So you need to have that ability to do risk POCs and then accept that it will fail actually. So that is the second learning that I can see. And the third, like I mentioned, the domain guys have to be at the center of whatever experimentation you're doing. It is not a technology problem. It's not a data science find. It's actually led by the domain guys, to my mind. And I think a lot of knowledge, skill building and the domain side of that is still kind of there to come. I think the technologies are always this will change the world, that will change the world, this will happen. But you have to really go back and ask the business guy what's the value that it's going to bring to the table, and is he ready to kind of co-opt, I think. So I think there are three learnings, at least from what we've done till now. I just thought I'll just share that.
Just to add on to that, what Ramesh just said is, I think I would say that the first part is just because there's a new technology, don't look for a problem. So, we need to be clear in terms of, and a lot of organizations, a lot of banks already have a lot of, what we call as technical debt. So you've got to look at how does this in different forms. I think Ramesh and Vijosh alluded to it. How does this particular technology fit within your ecosystem? We also talked about, the business and the domain involvement, but it is also not about looking at, existing ways of working, existing processes and saying, okay, how do I apply technology to it? But, what is the value we want to create? And for that, do I have the right process in place, or do I need to, first of all, revisit the process before technology, given the power of this technology, so that you can harness more? Otherwise, you might probably tick a box in terms of leveraging the technology, but the value would be significantly eroded. So my suggestion would be, again, what are we trying to solve? How does it fit within your ecosystem? And are we willing, and are we at a point from an organization standpoint to, go down the path from a change management standpoint? It all looks good from the outside, but this is not a 1 day, 2 day, 2 month journey. It is more a strategy question in terms of the path that you're willing to walk when you want to go from POC to scale. So I think those are important considerations that kind of, I would say, are learnings from our own journey that needs to be thought through. And you're willing to evolve because it is new. We're going to learn. We may not have all the answers day one, but are we in an ecosystem where we're willing to change, we're willing to evolve as we learn?
Fully harness the power of the predictive AI itself. So I guess the earlier statement, right approach for right cause, is a very important element. So we should ensure that we should be using GenAI when we have fully utilized our machine learning, predictive AI capabilities, and we believe now we are in the position to start using GenAI in the right manner. The second aspect is, I think once we start using it, I think small point which again Ravi was trying to mention, is the whole aspects around data privacy. As many of the people in this panel represent banks, where the data privacy is of utmost importance, and we should be looking at in case we're looking at unstructured data, what kind of data we are looking at, is it the right kind of data which a financial institution can look at. And third, as we go ahead and we start putting across the processes on GenAI into play. I think for first 2 to 3 quarters, the human in the loop plays a very important role. So we should ensure that all processes run with the human in the loop capability. And if we are able to cut down processing time and the overall capabilities, processing capabilities by 80 to 90%, but let 10% being done by the human over there, I think is an important approach to start with.
I'll just add a couple of points here. One thing, we have to be convinced that this technology is going to make life simpler. Now, what does that mean? It essentially means that in this country, everybody has a PAN card, and you will be surprised that the number of PAN cards holders in this country is just around, not even less than, it's about less than 10% of the overall population of this country. Now, if everybody has to get a PAN card, the barrier is language. And this is and if you go to bhashini.com, that's about multiple languages in which you can interact. And GenAI can make possible every person in the hinterlands of this country who knows those languages which GenAI knows, obtain a PAN card. Now that's going to make life simpler. The person, 100 rupees is what Government of India charges. You pay 200 rupees to an agent, you save that 200 rupees. So life is going to be making simpler, number one. Now, if you have to get started, you don't have to look at all these complexities. You can start with whatever your productivity tool which you use, like Office or Windows, where you have copilots. That's the easier one. And the next easiest one is you have low-code, no-code tools which are available to you, which is an easier point to get started. And the last point I want to say is in the operational side, where you have a lot of OCR technologies, etc. GenAI is going to kind of bring value in the sense that in a form which has a tick mark. Today there are difficulties in technologies which are available there, and GenAI will definitely make sure that those kind of use cases are handled better.
Understood. Amply clear. As we think about, especially, I think the point around, it's not a tech-only thing. It's not a solution looking for a problem, but it's actually solving a real problem, which, let's say, as one builds out a business case, the top line is solved for. Because you're going after an opportunity, you're going after a value pool that really exists, and you're trying to crack that. Any perspectives on how do you keep, and especially as you think about scaling up, how do you keep the cost in check? There have been, different discussions around, these models being very expensive and the kind of compute that's required to process the data. And especially as one thinks about investing in data capabilities inside financial institutions. Of course, again, different levels of maturity. Many have already come up the curve. Many are catching up. But any comments from the panel on how to think about cost?
To start with, I think a couple of simple elements. I think, as I said earlier, we should see how we are improving on our capabilities which are there in the bank. So if you're working transformational on the current capability itself, the cost is incremental. And second, I think that's a very simple stuff that whichever partner we are already working with, we should see that we invest more over there, and we use the same. Say if you have cloud with one particular partner, then we start experimenting on the same rather than starting something afresh across, so that we have the right value coming across.
So I think here a couple of points here. One, should we look at cost and should we look at ROI? Should we look at cost or should we look at ROI? I think it's very, very critical to keep that perspective in mind, because a lot of GenAI cases, you would believe that they would actually drive efficiencies actually, and they would be self-funding. I mean, normal human, right? If you get it right, because you are going to get benefit in terms of resource efficiency or a faster turnaround or a better experience, right? Whatever you want to put it. So I think that bracket has to be kept in mind, to my mind. I think it's not just a cost decision to look at. But having said that, I think, like I mentioned, the compute power is going to be a big challenge, because these are run by very high-end GPU requirements. And there are various times. And there are complications. Should you model on cloud or you should model on-prem? If you model on-prem, you need to invest into GPU, the capex goes up on that one, right? So it's like but if you do on cloud, maybe you can do it faster, and if it doesn't work, you can get off, right? So I think understanding that is a very good area. And I think, for example, we very focused here, say that we can create a FinOps area, which basically looks at how a cloud engineering would work in terms of the construction of the model. And it's important because, like I said, it can go either way. So I think that's the second part when you look at costs. Someone with that deep expertise has to look at the right architecture construct of doing that particular project. Otherwise, you will end up in trouble, you know. And the third part is basically the skill set costs, because we're not kind of looking at that. I do think that we will continue to find very difficult to get the kind of skills that are needed to make. While it's easy to say, oh, everything will go in GenAI and you know some output will come. It's not that easy, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of data engineering involved, a lot of tuning required, a lot of model understanding is required. So these are three drivers to my mind, and each of those buckets. So one is the business ROI, one is the kind of the hardware and the engineering kind of costs, and the third is the skill costs that come in. And then you look at the overall picture and see how do you want to move forward.
So just to supplement, you know, I was about to use the word value. So I think more than cost, it's the value question. What is the value that this particular technology is going to bring in? And I'll go back to the example that you shared, right? You had a car and three things, you know. Is the value around efficiency, maybe in the short term? And you've got to really have both, at least on paper, a short term and a mid-term strategy. You know, believing in that this technology, you know, has the worth. And are you driving efficiency? Are you driving, you know, new business models, or are you creating a new, you know, marketplace? You know, in terms of where do you see banking evolving to more than, you know, the technology? And I think if, you know, the value is there and we are able to have the right governance around it. If we don't have the right governance, and I think Ramesh touched on an important point of FinOps, and we know in the cloud context, some of that you know, just gets off control very quickly. So if you have the governance around it, and you look at it in terms of the value that you create for your customer, and therefore indirectly for the bank, I think the cost question will probably get more self-answered.
Yeah, sorry. I think one is, you know, obviously the revenue which is generated by investing in Gen AI, you know, is one portion which is there. But then there are other areas of benefits which definitely need to be considered, like risk mitigation, which is there, your governance improvement which can come in, your customer service improvement which can come in. Those are indirect benefits which are quantifiable, but that can help, you know, grow the revenue in a certain manner. From a cost perspective, I think obviously, as Ramesh rightly mentioned, the cost of processing, the compute power is quite high. But I think I'm a bit optimistic there that, you know, maybe before ChatGPT came in, actually, it was never envisaged that this is a field which is going to grow and become so consumerized, you know. But I think at some point it is now at a cusp of getting consumerized and made more easily accessible. So my belief is that as technology progresses further, the cost of running it also will go down, you know, quite dramatically, and it will be more accessible. But yeah, there will be ideas and thoughts to how to, you know, manage the cost for the overall compute power which is needed.
Understood. You know, and I like the word on ROI and value, and you know, how do we actually pivot ourselves to that? It's a good segue into actually the next segment that I wanted to cover. If you can get the slide back. So this is now around the consumers. Let's say, you know, there is, we spoke about the RM co-pilot, we spoke about CAMs getting prepared for the underwriters. So the idea was to say that, and this is a survey that was run across 18 countries, some 13,000 respondents, mostly frontline and middle managers. And the idea was to say that people that will actually consume these solutions, for whom we are actually building this out, how do they feel? And it appears like of the 18 countries, India was ranking 60% of the folks from the front line actually said they were very optimistic about GenAI solutions. And on the other hand, at bottom right, if you could see that, you know, also of the 18, India ranked last on least concerned. Very less concerned, lots of optimism in the folks that will actually end up using these solutions. What's your take on this?
I can go. Obviously, in use cases like customer service, marketing, it's going to help the front-end team in a big way, because the curation of the responses, the profiling, and adding to the human emotion along with the responses is going to help the front-end team in a big way. Now, that's the reason you see in terms of the most optimistic, we rank in the top 3, because there is a certain concern at both ends, the front-end teams as well as the consumer. And that's where this will play a very pivotal role. It will ease the pressure in terms of the volumes which are going through all our institutions, customer service responses. One, second is in terms of, it should help in terms of creating better awareness, both within the institution and the consumer stage. And on the long term, it will help us to sort of improve the efficiency, which to the previous question should help us get a better ROI. It's premature right now for us to conclude that is it expensive, because it at the early stage. Most of the institutions are doing a lot of pilots, and like you mentioned about ChatGPT, is saying that the excitement it created for all of us, saying that yes, it can be a consumer-facing tool as well. Same way, this will come at very handy for the front-end teams as another tool for them to do better. My views.
I think there's also a story out here. I think if you see the countries that are most optimistic, I think the demographic setups are different. I think clearly that's kind of coming out. I think we are a land of opportunity right now. So I do think that the adoption rates will be far better in India. I think we are the kind of use cases that we can think of at scale will also drive. I think so. To that extent, I think it's not surprising to my mind that it's kind of showing some of the countries in that bracket. But I think like everything else, each of the countries will also have to go through a different cycle. I think for India, I do think the digital journey for last 4-5 years or last 6 years has kind of catapulted this to this kind of optimism. If you look at it, I think it's a kind of interplay that's happening here. That's also going to bring some of these use cases to the front line. And the scale of the data, the size of the data that we carry. So I think it all alludes well for at least for India for the next few years. And I think, like I said, I do think the costs will come down, like they said, and the equalization of this will happen over a period of a few years. But I think there will be many early adopters to my mind. So that's how I look at this.
So if we worked up an appetite, I don't know if we can open up for audience questions already now. Is there any questions in the audience now? I have one last question for the panel after this. Okay, not yet. Why don't we do one last question for the panelists first? So I'm going to now ask you to look into the future. We've got a bunch of learning already on the kind of POCs we've been running. We've got some learning on the risks and challenges. We've thought about how to actually scale up POCs and try and take them to actual value. We spoke about ROI. We spoke about the kind of sort of governance and control function sort of elements that need to exist. But if you play this out, of course, there are technologies that have come and gone, and there are hype cycles and so on. But play this out for the next 3 to 5 years. And if you were to imagine stable state for GenAI, how would you describe stable state for GenAI 3 years out? Anyone?
Since nobody raised a hand, I can go. So the anticipation is over next 3 to 5 years. It would nicely coexist with predictive AI, with human intelligence. This should coexist nicely. And as all of the co-panelists mentioned, saying that all of us are doing multiple pilots. And while the pilots become successful, we'll have to make sure that we keep increasing the use cases. Because after a 3 to 5 year period, the ROI has to come out. Otherwise, it will become another talking point saying that it came in and it died. So I think so the adoption will be a function of use cases, how committed we are all as an industry to make it successful and make it coexist with the current tools as well as in terms of the resources. But definitely, if we play our cards right, it should improve the efficiency in a big way. And some of the use cases like customer service, customer targeting, we really need those interventions with the increasing scale in all our institutions in a big country like ours.
I think this is not a hype for sure. I think there's a fundamental difference between what happened. I'm just taking an example of a blockchain. Not that I'm moving away, but I think it was kind of hyped to a very large extent, and the end results came quite late. I mean, today maybe it's still figuring out on blockchain, or if you look at big data, today big data is actually normalized thing. But if you go back to 2012, 13, everybody was big data. I think this is fundamentally very different. This is definitely an internet moment for the civilization that we've seen. I think there will be bad and good. I think we'll also have to look at the negative sides. We spoke a lot about the positive efficiencies and all, but I do think there's a negative angle also, which I wanted to cover. So if you have to look at 3-year, crystal gazing, I think there will be a lot of people who will have negative views on it, and there will be a lot of negative use cases, whether it is fake media, deep fakes. Just imagine frauds that can go into a different direction with this kind of a platform. So I think it is a very inflection point for humanity to see how to manage this in a very calibrated way, especially for the enterprises, because there you don't have a chance to go wrong. Especially take a case like a deep fake, what it can do to a kind of a credit, assessment, right? A KYC kind of a stuff. It's a very, very different thing. And I think that's where I think a lot of thoughts have to go in solutioning this in a positive way, and also kind of look at how to prevent the negative parts of the generative AI. And that's what is going to take time. So to my mind, I think the perfection of the technology and the capability is going to take longer than actually adoption, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think 2 points on this. So I think one is obviously just segueing from what Ramesh mentioned, the negative aspects of it. I think you will eventually, a solution, I don't know how to describe, but a solution says something like a CAPTCHA will come in where you will kind of identify a interaction, a solution from a fake versus a real one. So you will have some moment like that which will come in. The other area which I think the next 3-4 year moment for me is skill augmentation. I think that's an area which will definitely grow. We're already seeing a lot of media courses, stuff coming on AI. You start a YouTube video and you'll find some add-on AI courses. But I think overall from an industry perspective, there will be people who will be focused on skill augmentation, will think that this is the future, and you'll have more talent which will start mushrooming out to really run this. And that's where I think will further add the further, acknowledgement of the new product, new tools which will come over on it.
In my opinion, in the next 3 to 4 years, it's like the UPI movement. Everybody is using UPI. And I think Government of India's projects, specifically in using GenAI, will bring a lot of citizens closer to every industry, even the government, and whatever services are available. And what I think is, in 3 years, every industry will think back and say that, how do I also integrate into that ecosystem, exactly like how everybody else integrated into the UPI ecosystem.
I think
Just
people have already summarized, but two points which I'd like to leave with is that as most of the work on the banking side would be on the existing use cases, so it's going to augment the way the banking is working, and it can lead to efficiencies between 15 to 30%, depending on what kind of process or what kind of product is being clicked across, whether it's one-to-one marketing or whether improving the scorecard calibration. So each of them have specific ROI improvement use cases, and I believe as we spend more time on GenAI, this will really supplement the way the banks are working. The second aspect is the whole about the governance, whether in the banking aspect or overall industry, the deep fake what we spoke about. I think that we will have to work within a very strong governance mechanism to ensure that we have the right way and the right benefits coming to us.
Yeah, just 2 call outs from my side. I think if you go back to the survey that you had shared, I think a lot of it is also reflective of our population and demographics, and the young population that we have, which also means that the ask and expectations of financial institutions is only going to increase. And how can this particular technology really enable to drive that transformation that we've all been talking about? So it is going to bring a new growth through the whole transformation journey that we're continuously in. It's not a program or with a start of stop, but it's more continuous. So that is another aspect, with the demands and expectations going up, this will come in. Yes, like Ramesh mentioned, I think there will be, some elements of fraud, etc., that we need to be careful about. So this is more about, at least initially, how does it complement the human than replace. So it's more a complementary thing, and there will be supporting technologies that would come, just like we've seen in the past, to prevent, some of the fraud-related activities. Second, I think it will also transform, a lot of roles and functions, within organizations. I think there might be some degree of initial scare, is in terms of, is this going to replace humans, replace jobs? We talk about efficiency. Efficiency can be interpreted in multiple different ways. But I think it is about evolution. It is about evolving, and we've done one round of evolution or multiple rounds of evolution over the last 20 years. I think this has the potential to evolve, where humans take up far more high-end and upskill kind of roles and leave, the technology to do, a number of what today is probably not mundane, but might be mundane 3 to 5 years down the road. So I think it's a point where the human and the role that we play in society, in our job, would continue to evolve and, go higher and upwards in the next 3 to 5 years.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll try and bring this to a close with this one comment that I kind of believe in, but you guys can decide. If you believe Bill Gates is a reasonable or credible futurist, he basically said that there are 3 things in his life that he's felt are absolutely game changing. He said the first thing was GUI, graphical user interface, when you instead of just the code that you see, you actually had a mouse and you could click on icons and so on, which is the GUI. Second thing was internet, when the World Wide Web came. And third thing was GenAI. So he believes GenAI is actually here to stay. It's not necessarily a hype. I kind of agree with what Ramesh was saying earlier, but it's on us to make the most of it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, all dignitaries. Dear ladies and gentlemen, our chief guest has arrived, and may I request all to please be seated